Ghastly Garlic Episode 3, Eyes of Fear, a chilling ghost story. It was a humid summer night when young Jake was abruptly awakened by the creaking of his bedroom door. His heart raced as he sat up in bed, blinking away the remnants of sleep. He could feel the weight of someone sitting at the foot of his bed, and his initial thought was that it was his mother checking in on him. But as Jake's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized it wasn't his mother at all. Instead, he was met with the chilling sight of an eyeless boy, about his own age, sitting there. His empty sockets seemed to penetrate the darkness, and Jake could feel a shiver run down his spine. The eyeless boy extended his hand, holding out a small box. Jake hesitated, unsure of what to do. He reached out slowly, his fingers trembling as they brushed against the box. But before he could grasp it, the boy pulled back. "Give it," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Then, in the blink of an eye, the boy vanished, leaving behind only the faint imprint of where he had been sitting on the bed. Jake sat there, his heart pounding, unsure if what he had just experienced was real or merely a trick of his imagination. He lay back down, trying to convince himself that it had all been a dream. But as he closed his eyes, the memory of the eyeless boy lingered, haunting him like a ghost. Hours passed, but sleep eluded Jake. He tossed and turned, and the image of the eyeless boy burned into his mind. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to filter through his window, he drifted off into an uneasy slumber. When Jake awoke the next morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The events of the previous night seemed like a distant memory, but a sense of unease remained. He tried to push it aside as he went about his day, but no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. That night, as he lay in bed, Jake couldn't help but feel a sense of dread creeping over him. He tried to ignore it, burying himself under the covers and closing his eyes tightly, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. And then, just as he was about to drift off to sleep, he felt it. The weight of someone sitting on his bed, the subtle shift of the mattress beneath him. His heart raced as he slowly opened his eyes, dreading what he might see, and there he was, the eyeless boy, sitting at the foot of his bed once again. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the boy's empty sockets, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Who are you?" Jake whispered, his voice trembling with fear. The boy said nothing, only extending his hand once more to the small box held out in front of him. Jake hesitated, unsure of what to do, but something compelled him to reach out, to take the box, and to see what was inside. As his fingers brushed against the cool metal of the box, Jake felt a surge of electricity shoot through him. He gasped, pulling his hand back as if burned, and then, just like that, the boy was gone. Jake blinked, rubbing his eyes in disbelief. Had it all been a dream, or was there something more sinister at play? He lay there for what felt like hours, unable to shake the feeling of unease that settled over him like a heavy blanket. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and Jake drifted off into a fitful sleep. The image of the eyeless boy burned into his mind, but even in his dreams, he could feel the boy's presence lurking just beyond the edge of his consciousness. And as the night wore on, Jake couldn't help but wonder if he would ever truly be free from the haunting gaze of the eyeless boy. 5 years had passed since that eerie night, but the memory of the eyeless boy still lingered in Jake's mind like a ghostly whisper. He had almost convinced himself that it was nothing more than a dream until another encounter shook him to the core. It was a lazy afternoon, and Jake's girlfriend, Emma, had come over to do homework. After finishing her assignments, she decided to take a nap while she waited for her parents to pick her up. Jake watched her sleep, feeling a sense of contentment wash over him, but his tranquility was short-lived when Emma suddenly sat up, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed to the corner of the room where the wall met the ceiling, her voice trembling as she spoke. "In the corner," she whispered, "I saw him. The eyeless boy is staring at me." Jake's blood ran cold as he remembered his own encounter with the eyeless boy. He tried to shake Emma out of her daze, but she seemed fixated on the spot where she had seen the ghostly apparition. When Emma finally snapped out of it, she was visibly shaken. She recounted her experience to Jake, and he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine. It seemed that the eyeless boy was more than just a figment of his imagination. As the evening wore on, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him. He couldn't help but wonder if the eyeless boy was still watching them, lurking just out of sight. That night, as Jake lay in bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He tossed and turned, unable to find a comfortable position, his mind racing with thoughts of the eyeless boy. And then, just as he was about to drift off to sleep, he heard it. A faint scratching sound came from the corner of the room where Emma had seen the eyeless boy. Jake's heart raced as he strained to listen, the sound growing louder and more insistent with each passing moment. He wanted to get up to investigate, but a sense of dread held him rooted to the spot. He lay there, paralyzed with fear, as the scratching sound grew louder and louder until it felt like it was echoing inside his head. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the scratching stopped. Jake lay there, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what to do next. He glanced at the clock on his nightstand, the numbers glowing dimly in the darkness. It was well past midnight, and Jake knew he wouldn't be getting any sleep tonight. As he lay there, listening to the sound of his own breathing, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced around the room, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching for any sign of the eyeless boy. But the room was empty, save for Jake and the faint glow of the moonlight filtering in through the curtains. He closed his eyes, willing himself to relax, but no matter what he did, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over him like a heavy fog. Hours passed, but sleep eluded Jake. He lay there, his mind racing with thoughts of the eyeless boy, until finally, as the first light of dawn began to filter through his window, he drifted off into an uneasy slumber. When he awoke the next morning, Jake felt like he hadn't slept at all. He stumbled out of bed, his body feeling heavy and sluggish, as if weighed down by the events of the previous night. He glanced around the room, half expecting to see the eyeless boy lurking in the shadows. But the room was empty, save for the faint morning light streaming in through the window. Jake shook his head, trying to clear away the fog of sleep that still clung to his mind. He needed to get ready for the day ahead, put the events of the previous night behind him, and focus on the present. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that the eyeless boy was still out there, watching and waiting, his empty sockets filled with a malevolent energy that seemed to pierce straight through Jake's soul. As he got ready for school, Jake couldn't help but wonder if he would ever be able to escape the haunting gaze of the eyeless boy, or if, perhaps, he was destined to be haunted by the memory of that fateful encounter for the rest of his days. As time went on, Jake and Emma's relationship blossomed, and they eventually moved into Jake's childhood home, where the memory of the eyeless boy still lingered like a shadow in the night. But it wasn't long before their peaceful existence was disrupted once again. Their daughter, Lily, was just 2 years old when strange things began to happen. Every night, like clockwork, she would wake up and start talking to someone, or something, in her room. Jake and Emma dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination at first, but as Lily's conversations became more frequent, they couldn't ignore the eerie similarities to Jake's own encounter. One night, unable to resist his curiosity any longer, Jake decided to ask Lily who she was talking to. Her response sent a chill down his spine. "It's a little boy," Lily said, her voice innocent yet tinged with sadness. "He's lost and looking for his mommy." Jake and Emma exchanged a nervous glance, their minds racing with possibilities. Could it be the eyeless boy? The nightly conversations continued, each one more unsettling than the last, until Jake and Emma finally made the decision to move out of the house and into their own place. But little did they know that the eyeless boy had other plans. The move into their new home was a hectic affair, filled with boxes and furniture to be shifted. But as Jake and Emma settled into their new surroundings, they couldn't shake the feeling of relief that washed over them. Finally, they thought they could leave the memory of the eyeless boy behind them. Lily, too, seemed to thrive in their new home. She slept soundly through the night, her conversations with the mysterious little boy a thing of the past. Jake and Emma breathed a sigh of relief, convinced that they had finally escaped the clutches of the supernatural. Moving into their new home was supposed to be a fresh start for Jake, Emma, and Lily. They hoped that leaving behind the memories of the eyeless boy would bring them peace and tranquility. But as the days turned into weeks, they soon realized that their troubles were far from over. Their new home was a quaint 2-story house nestled at the end of a quiet street. It had a welcoming front porch and a spacious backyard where Lily could play. Inside, The rooms were bright and airy, filled with sunlight streaming in through the windows. As Jake and Emma unpacked their belongings, they couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement about their new life. They imagined family dinners around the kitchen table, lazy afternoons in the backyard, and bedtime stories in Lily's cozy bedroom. But as the sun began to set on their first night in their new home, a sense of unease settled over Jake and Emma. The shadows seemed to grow longer, and the house suddenly felt much larger and more ominous than it had during the daylight hours. "It's just because it's our first night," Emma said, trying to reassure herself as much as Jake. "We'll get used to it." But try as they might, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. That night, as they lay in bed, Jake and Emma found it difficult to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards and every gust of wind rattling the windows seemed to set their nerves on edge. "I'll go check on Lily," Jake said suddenly, unable to bear the silence any longer. Emma nodded, grateful for the distraction. She watched as Jake slipped out of bed and made his way down the hallway to Lily's room. She listened intently, straining to hear any sound that might indicate trouble, but all she heard was the quiet murmur of Jake's voice as he spoke to Lily and the soft giggles of their daughter in response. Emma smiled to herself, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. Maybe everything would be okay after all. But as Jake returned to their room and climbed back into bed, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She lay there, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of the eyeless boy and the haunting presence that had followed them from their old home. And then, just as she was about to drift off to sleep, she heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible over the sound of her own breathing. Emma froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She strained to listen, her ears tuned to catch any sound that might indicate danger. And then she heard it again. The whisper grows louder and more insistent with each passing moment. "Mommy," it said, the voice faint but unmistakable. Emma's blood ran cold as she sat up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. She glanced over at Jake, but he was still fast asleep, oblivious to the whispering voice that filled the room. "Mommy," the voice said again, closer this time. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she turned to look at the foot of the bed. There, in the darkness, stood the unmistakable figure of the eyeless boy. She wanted to scream, to wake Jake and flee from the room, but a sense of paralysis held her rooted to the spot. She could only watch in horror as the eyeless boy drew closer, his empty sockets fixed on her with a haunting intensity. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the eyeless boy vanished, leaving Emma alone in the darkness. She lay there, trembling with fear, unable to move as the events of the night replayed themselves in her mind. She wanted to believe that it had all been a dream, a trick of her overactive imagination, but deep down, she knew the truth. The eyeless boy was real, and he had followed them to their new home. The next morning, Emma tried to put the events of the previous night out of her mind as she went about her daily routine. She made breakfast for Lily, helped her get ready for daycare, and tried to act as if everything was normal. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over her like a dark cloud. Every shadow seemed to hold the promise of the eyeless boy's return, and every whisper of the wind was a harbinger of danger. As the day wore on, Emma's nerves began to fray. She jumped at the slightest sound, her mind racing with thoughts of the eyeless boy and the terror he had brought into their lives. When Jake returned home from work that evening, Emma was waiting for him in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured them each a glass of wine. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake frowned, his brow furrowing with concern. "What's wrong?" Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I saw him," she said finally. "The eyeless boy. He was in our room last night." Jake's eyes widened in shock. "Are you serious?" His mind reeled with disbelief. How could the eyeless boy have followed them here? Was there no escape from his haunting presence? Emma nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw him. He was standing at the foot of our bed, just watching me." Jake reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice firm with determination. "We'll find out who he is and why he's here, and we'll make him leave." But deep down, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She knew that their troubles were far from over and that the eyeless boy's presence would continue to haunt them until they uncovered the truth. And so, as they sat there in the dim light of their kitchen, Emma and Jake made a pact to confront the eyeless boy head-on, no matter what it took. They didn't know how they would do it or what dangers they might face along the way, but one thing was certain: they would never stop until they had banished the eyeless boy from their lives for good. Weeks passed since Emma's unsettling encounter with the eyeless boy in their new home. Despite their best efforts to carry on with normal life, the shadow of fear cast by the haunting presence lingered over Jake and Emma like a heavy fog. Every creak of the floorboards and every flicker of movement in the corner of their eyes sent shivers down their spines. As the days turned into nights, their once peaceful home became a battleground of fear and uncertainty. Lily, too young to understand the gravity of the situation, continued to play and laugh as if nothing was wrong, oblivious to the terror that lurked just beyond the edge of her perception. But Jake and Emma knew that they couldn't keep the truth from her forever. They needed to find a way to confront the eyeless boy and banish him from their lives once and for all, and so they began to delve into the mysteries surrounding his presence, searching for any clue that might lead them to the truth. Their search led them down a winding path of uncertainty as they combed through old records and archives again, in search of answers. They spoke to neighbors and local historians, hoping that someone might shed some light on the enigmatic figure that haunted their every waking moment. But the more they searched, the more elusive the truth became. There were no records of a boy who matched the description of the eyeless boy, and there was no mention of anyone who had died in their new home. It was as if he had simply materialized out of thin air, his origins lost to the passage of time. Frustrated and desperate, Jake and Emma turned to more unconventional methods in their search for answers. They consulted psychics and mediums, hoping that someone with a connection to the spirit world might be able to provide them with some insight. But the answers they received only served to deepen the mystery. Some claimed that the eyeless boy was a lost soul, trapped between the worlds of the living and the dead. Others suggested that he was a malevolent entity, drawn to their home by some unseen force. With each passing day, the tension in their home grew thicker, until it felt as if they were suffocating under its weight. Jake and Emma's once happy lives had been shattered by the presence of the eyeless boy, and they knew that they couldn't go on like this forever. And then, one night, as they lay in bed, unable to sleep, they heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible over the sound of their own breathing. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she sat up in bed, her eyes wide with terror. She glanced over at Jake, but he was still fast asleep, his breathing steady and even. The whisper came again, closer this time, and Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to scream, to wake Jake and flee from the room, but a sense of paralysis held her rooted to the spot. And then, suddenly, she saw him. The eyeless boy stood at the foot of their bed, his empty sockets fixed on her with haunting intensity. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the apparition before her. She could feel the weight of his gaze and the chill of his presence pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the eyeless boy vanished, leaving Emma alone in the darkness. She sat there, trembling with fear, unable to move as the events of the night replayed themselves in her mind. She knew that she needed to tell Jake what had happened to confront the reality of their situation head-on, but a part of her was afraid of what he might say. But as she looked at him lying there beside her, his face peaceful in sleep, she knew that she couldn't keep the truth from him any longer. She reached out and gently shook his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jake," she said, her voice trembling with fear. "Jake, wake up." Jake stirred, his eyes fluttering open. "What is it?" he asked, his voice groggy with sleep. Emma took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I saw him," she said finally. "The eyeless boy. He was in our room again." Jake's eyes widened in shock as he sat up, his gaze scanning the darkness. "Where is he?" he asked, his voice filled with urgency. "He's gone now," Emma replied, her voice barely audible. "But he was here. I saw him." Jake reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "We'll figure this out," he said, his voice firm with determination. "We'll find out who he is and why he's here, and we'll make him leave." But deep down, Emma couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled over her like a heavy weight. She knew that their troubles were far from over and that the eyeless boy's presence would continue to haunt them until they uncovered the truth. And so, as they sat there in the darkness, Emma and Jake made a pact to confront the eyeless boy head-on, no matter what it took. They didn't know how they would do it or what dangers they might face along the way, but one thing was certain: they would never stop until they had banished the eyeless boy from their lives for good. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the small town where Jake and Emma lived. It was a day like any other, yet the events of the previous night still weighed heavily on their minds. They had seen the eyeless boy once again, his haunting presence a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the edge of their perception. As they sat down for breakfast, their thoughts were consumed by the mystery of the eyeless boy and the desperate need to find a solution. But as they discussed their plans for the day ahead, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Emma glanced at Jake, her brow furrowed with confusion. It was unusual for them to have visitors so early in the morning, especially on a weekday. Jake got up from the table and made his way to the door, his heart pounding with anticipation. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he had a feeling that whoever was on the other side of that door might hold the key to unlocking the secrets of the eyeless boy. As he opened the door, Jake found himself face to face with a stranger. He was a tall man with a weathered face and a kind smile, his eyes twinkling with a warmth that put Jake at ease. "Good morning," the man said, his voice friendly yet tinged with a hint of mystery. "My name is Samuel. I was wondering if I could have a word with you and your wife." Jake glanced back at Emma, who had come to stand beside him, her expression filled with curiosity. "Of course," he said, gesturing for Samuel to come inside. As they made their way into the living room, Samuel took a seat on the couch, his eyes scanning the room with interest. He seemed to take in every detail, as if searching for something that only he could see. "I hope I'm not intruding," Samuel said, his voice gentle yet full of purpose, "but I couldn't help but notice that you two seem troubled." Jake and Emma exchanged a nervous glance, unsure of how to respond. They hadn't told anyone about their encounters with the eyeless boy, fearing that they would be dismissed as crazy or delusional. But there was something about Samuel that put them at ease, a sense of understanding that seemed to radiate from him like a comforting blanket. "We've been having some strange experiences lately," Emma said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's something in our house. Something otherworldly." Samuel nodded, his expression serious. "I had a feeling," he said. "I'm what you might call sensitive. I have a gift for seeing things that others cannot." Jake and Emma exchanged a surprised glance. They had heard of psychics and mediums before, but they had never met anyone who claimed to have such abilities. "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his curiosity piqued. Samuel took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. "I believe that your home is haunted," he said finally, "but not by just any spirit. There is something dark and malevolent lurking in the shadows, something that feeds off the fear and negativity of those around it." Jake and Emma's blood ran cold at Samuel's words. It was as if he had put into words the very thing that had been haunting their thoughts for weeks. "What can we do?" Emma asked, her voice trembling with fear. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes fixed on theirs with an intensity that sent shivers down their spines. "You must confront the spirit head-on," he said, his voice firm with conviction. "You must show it that you are not afraid, that you will not be intimidated by its presence." Jake and Emma exchanged a nervous glance. Confronting the eyeless boy was something they had been dreading, but if it was the only way to rid themselves of his haunting presence, then they were willing to do whatever it took. "How do we do that?" Jake asked, his voice filled with determination. Samuel smiled, a twinkle in his eyes. "You must hold a séance," he said. "Gather together those who are closest to you, those who will support you in your time of need. Together, you can create a barrier of positive energy that will drive the spirit away." Jake and Emma nodded, grateful for Samuel's guidance. They had never held a séance before, but if it was their best chance of banishing the eyeless boy from their lives, then they were willing to give it a try. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for coming to see us." Samuel nodded, rising from his seat and making his way to the door. "Remember," he said, pausing in the doorway to look back at them, "you are stronger than you know. You have the power to overcome this darkness, to reclaim your home and your lives." And with that, he was gone, leaving Jake and Emma alone with their thoughts. As they sat down to discuss their plan for the séance, a sense of determination washed over them. They knew that they had a long road ahead of them, filled with uncertainty and danger, but they were willing to face it head-on if it meant finally finding peace. And so, as the sun began to set on another day, Jake and Emma made preparations for the most important night of their lives. They reached out to their closest friends and family, gathering them together for a séance that would determine the fate of their home and their sanity. As they sat in a circle in their living room, surrounded by flickering candles and the soft glow of moonlight, they felt a sense of unity wash over them. They were not alone in their struggle, not anymore. Together, they would confront the darkness that had haunted them for so long and emerge victorious on the other side. And as they closed their eyes and joined hands, they felt a surge of energy course through them, a wave of positivity and determination that seemed to banish the darkness from their midst. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The eyeless boy was gone, his haunting presence was vanquished by the power of their love and unity. Jake and Emma opened their eyes and looked around the room, feeling a sense of relief wash over them like a warm embrace. The darkness that had once consumed them was gone, replaced by a feeling of lightness and freedom that they hadn't felt in months. As they hugged their friends and family, tears of joy streaming down their cheeks, they knew that they had finally found peace. The eyeless boy was gone, but the memories of their struggle would stay with them forever, a reminder of the strength and resilience that had brought them through the darkest of times. And as they settled down to sleep that night, their hearts filled with gratitude and hope, they knew that they had emerged from the shadows stronger than ever before, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold. The sun rose on a crisp, clear morning, casting a golden hue over the town where Jake, Emma, and Lily lived. It was a new day, a fresh start, and as they sat down for breakfast in their cozy kitchen, they felt a sense of optimism wash over them like a warm embrace. The events of the past few weeks seemed like a distant memory, overshadowed by the newfound sense of peace and tranquility that filled their home. The eyeless boy was gone, vanished from their lives by the power of their love and unity, and they were determined to move forward, leaving the darkness behind them. As they ate their breakfast, Jake and Emma couldn't help but smile at each other, their hearts filled with gratitude for the blessings they had been given. Lily sat between them, giggling and chattering away, her innocence a constant reminder of the beauty and wonder of life. After breakfast, they got ready for the day ahead, each filled with a sense of purpose and determination. Jake headed off to work, his mind buzzing with plans and ideas for the future, while Emma stayed home with Lily, relishing the chance to spend some quality time with her daughter. As they played together in the backyard, Emma couldn't help but marvel at the simple joy of watching Lily chase after butterflies and pick flowers from the garden. It was moments like these that made all the struggles and hardships of the past seem insignificant, reminding her of the preciousness of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. But as the day wore on, a sense of restlessness began to gnaw at Emma's heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something missing, something she needed to do in order to truly move forward. And then, as if in answer to her silent prayers, she heard a voice calling her name from the other side of the fence. "Emma, is that you?" Emma turned to see Mrs. Johnson, their neighbor from next door, leaning over the fence with a friendly smile on her face. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson," Emma said, returning the smile. "What can I do for you?" Mrs. Johnson hesitated for a moment, as if unsure of how to broach the subject. "I couldn't help but notice that things seem different around here lately," she said finally. "Is everything okay?" Emma's smile faltered for a moment as she thought about how to respond. She didn't want to burden Mrs. Johnson with the details of their recent struggles, but she also didn't want to lie to her. "We've had some challenges," she said carefully, choosing her words with precision, "but we're getting through them, thanks to the support of our friends and family." Mrs. Johnson nodded, her expression filled with understanding. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, "but if you ever need someone to talk to, you know where to find me." Emma thanked her, grateful for her kindness, and watched as Mrs. Johnson made her way back to her own house. As she disappeared from view, Emma felt a sense of gratitude wash over her, reminding her of the importance of community and connection in times of need. With a renewed sense of purpose, Emma returned her attention to Lily, determined to make the most of the time they had together. They spent the rest of the afternoon playing games and exploring the backyard, their laughter filling the air with joy and happiness. But as the sun began to set on another day, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing, something she needed to do in order to truly move forward. And then, as if by fate, she heard a knock at the door. Curious, Emma made her way to the front door and opened it to find Samuel standing on the porch, a smile on his face and a twinkle in his eyes. "Samuel," Emma said, her surprise evident in her voice. "What are you doing here?" Samuel chuckled, his laughter warm and inviting. "I thought I would stop by and see how you're doing," he said. "It's been a while since we last spoke, and I wanted to make sure that everything was okay." Emma felt a surge of gratitude wash over her as she invited Samuel inside. She had often thought about him in the days since their first meeting, wondering what had become of the mysterious stranger who had helped them in their time of need. As they sat down in the living room, Emma poured Samuel a cup of tea, and they began to catch up, sharing stories and laughter as if they had known each other for years. Emma found herself opening up to Samuel in a way that she hadn't with anyone else, telling him about their recent struggles and the newfound sense of peace that had come over them since banishing the eyeless boy from their lives. Samuel listened intently, his expression thoughtful as he absorbed her words. When she had finished, he leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "You've come a long way," he said finally, his voice soft yet filled with conviction, "but there is still work to be done." Emma's heart skipped a beat at Samuel's words. She had a feeling that he knew something that could help them finally put the past behind them and move forward with their lives. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel smiled, a twinkle in his eyes. "There is a reason why the eyeless boy was drawn to your home," he said. "A reason that goes beyond the surface of things, beyond the realm of the ordinary." Emma felt a chill run down her spine at Samuel's words. She had always suspected that there was more to the eyeless boy's presence than met the eye, but she had never been able to put her finger on exactly what it was. "What do you mean?" she asked again, her voice filled with curiosity. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Your home is a place of power," he said. "A place where the veil between the worlds is thin, where the boundaries between the living and the dead blur together." Emma's eyes widened in shock at Samuel's words. She had never considered the possibility that their home could be anything other than a simple house, a place to live and raise their family. "But why us?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. "Why our home?" Samuel shrugged, a mysterious smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Some things are beyond our understanding," he said, "but I believe that you were chosen for a reason, that you have a destiny to fulfill." Emma's mind raced with possibilities as she considered Samuel's words. She had always felt a connection to their home, a sense of belonging that went beyond the physical confines of the building itself. "What do we do?" she asked finally, her voice filled with determination. Samuel reached out and took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You must embrace your destiny," he said. "You must tap into the power that lies dormant within you and use it to bring balance to the world." Emma felt a surge of energy course through her at Samuel's words, a sense of purpose and determination that she had never felt before. She knew that she had a long journey ahead of her, filled with challenges and obstacles, but she was ready to face them head-on if it meant fulfilling her destiny. "Thank you, Samuel," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for everything." Samuel smiled, his eyes twinkling with pride. "You're welcome," he said. "And remember, I'll always be here if you need me." As Samuel made his way to the door, Emma couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement building within her. She had no idea what the future held, but she knew that she was ready to face it with courage and determination, knowing that she had the power to overcome any obstacle that stood in her way. As she watched Samuel disappear down the path, Emma felt a renewed sense of hope wash over her, filling her heart with joy and anticipation. She knew that this was only the beginning of her journey, but she was ready to embrace it with open arms, knowing that the best was yet to come. The end.
Thank you for joining this chilling journey. If you enjoyed exploring ghosts, mythical creatures, urban legends, and much more, please share and like this video. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications bell for more. See you soon, my brave explorers.